has to live in presence. His schedule's pretty tight. Going down to Nashville before he flies off for the night. He lands on the roof of the Grand Ole Opry, the reindeer hanging by the sleigh, looking dashing as can be. He walks up to the stage, tips his hat, shows a grin, looks darn good for his age, and says, "Fellas, can I sit in?" Whips out an old fiddle, rosins up his bow, starts out an old-time number called the Cotton Eye Joe. Swing your partner round and round, do-si-do in the middle. It's a holiday hoedown when Santa plays the fiddle.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. We're getting close, folks. It's kind of a pre-holiday edition here for podcast by George. That song that you just heard, that's the great Bob Pace. You see, right there he is, man. That's his most recent album. He's got another one coming out. Stay tuned for that because it's going to have the song on it, Hero, what it takes to be a hero. The one that I co-wrote with Bob is going to be on this new album, but that's something that he did, a holiday album with the String Prophets. And I got a graphic here of the there they are. There's Bob and Catherine Severing Fox on the fiddle that you heard there. That's the String Prophets. You can still buy that album. Just go on Google, search that out. Search Bob Pace. You can pick that up in time for the holidays. It's great. There's a shameless plug for my old buddy, my old pal, Bob Pace, that regularly has a lot of music on the show. We're going to get him on when that new album comes out too, but that's for another day. Folks, today we're going to be talking to our good friend, our good buddy, our good pal up at Iowa State University. It's Dr. William A. Gallus Jr., folks. He's a professor of meteorology, and he's been at Iowa State University for over 25 years. His research interests include improved understanding and prediction of thunderstorm systems, their evolution, rainfall, severe weather, everything like that, blizzards, hurricanes, all that. Matter of fact, the last time we had him on, we were talking about Hurricane Ian, and he was sounding the alarm bell before that, before anybody was almost down there in Florida. We kind of had the inside track on that. We were talking about Tampa at the time, but it turns out it was more like Fort Myers Beach. But you can basically see Tampa from Fort Myers Beach. It was real close, and the devastation and destruction was immense. We're not going to be talking about hurricanes today. We're going to be talking about blizzards. We're going to be talking about what I liken to the warthog coming into the heartland here just in time for the holiday season, it looks like, and it could potentially be very bad. But let's click a button here and let's do this and add him to the stream and say good afternoon to Dr. Gallus. Hi, Doc.
Hi, George.
There's some forecasting. I've looked around today and I'm seeing a lot of people now that are starting to pick up on what you've been putting down. I heard you first start talking about this almost a week ago. I mean, that this could potentially be bad. And from what I understand, it ain't looking any better. In fact, you can make an argument for our part of the world. It's starting to look maybe a little bit worse, right?
Yeah, George, it's kind of odd. I realized I'm talking to you today, and it's over 3 days before the event is going to get started. Normally, we would say so much can change in that amount of time. You don't really want to waste your time talking about the forecast. This system has been interesting because for such a long time, the computers have been telling us there's going to be abnormally intense cold air come down from the Arctic. In fact, just an hour ago, I looked, it's 52 below zero in the Yukon. So we know the cold air is up there and it's headed our way. Pretty much we have all of the ingredients that you need for a storm system, and we kind of have them on steroids, which is what is making a lot of meteorologists take notice that something really big probably will happen, and probably in the Midwest about Thursday this week.
Hey, there's a lot of ways to begin this, a lot of different angles to look at weather. One thing is we've been hearing, and primarily because of the climate, the Arctic is warming. Alaska, I keep hearing all of these horrible stories about Alaska and the permafrost melting and the coastlines receding, and Alaska has been stricken mightily by this. But they've gotten a lot of snow. I saw where Fairbanks just got buried. I mean, is that kind of where this thing began? It's reaching down here, or they're not connected?
So, this month was pretty warm in a lot of Alaska,
Yeah.
but like you said, Fairbanks and Anchorage have been buried in lots of snow, and they're usually so cold in the winter that they don't get a lot of snow. So if they're having a warmer than normal winter, sometimes they do get the snow. our blast of cold air, sadly, is coming from somewhere even further away. It was 78 below zero in Siberia last week. That was the second coldest it had ever been in Russia in December in the last 40 years. And that is the air. So that's kind of coming across the frozen Arctic Ocean. So it sideswiped Alaska the last few days and has come into the Yukon and is now kind of pushed into eastern Alaska.
And it's riding on the jet stream, as it always seems to do. Let me bring this graphic up like they used to say on ESPN. Let's go to the videotape. Well, in this instance, let's go to the map. Let's go to the charts here. Take a look at this. This is the projected jet stream for next week. What are we seeing here?
Right. So, for us, we get these blasts of cold air when you see the winds coming from that upper left corner from Canada and diving strongly down into the United States. Some of the interesting things in this, which is a prediction for Thursday, the red and even some yellowish colors that are showing up are very strong winds. So the jet stream's even stronger than normal. And what you see in this picture is it's buckling. It's kind of making this kink down in the southern plains, and where it makes that bend is going to determine where you get this really intense storm system. So today, the models, after I sent this to you, will suggest that maybe this bend is going to happen a little further to the west. The more it shifts to the west, the closer Iowa will be to any big snowstorm and have a better potential for true blizzard conditions.
Oh man, blizzards reminds me of my truck driving days. Boy, the dreaded whiteouts. Like I tell people, I consider myself to be a professional driver because of my background. But man, if you're in a blizzard, if you're in a whiteout, everybody's on an even playing field. You can be a jet fighter pilot. It doesn't make any difference. You can't see, you can't drive, and it's white knuckle for sure. And I mean, every mile of the roadway could put you 6 feet under, folks. Be aware. Take precautions. Okay, so I'm looking at this jet stream, this deep dip down here. So we're talking now. These are winds mostly, but also cold weather. I mean, this is all pushing way south. It seems to me like.
Right. Since the jet stream is diving that far south, that means the cold air masses, which tend to lie down at lower levels in the atmosphere than this map, that means the cold air is going to get steered into places very far south. So the whole way to the southern tip of Texas. I know a lot of Iowans like to head to South Texas to avoid winter. They are likely to go below freezing. And then a day or two later, much of Florida may actually go below freezing.
Texas, I'll remind everybody of Austin. I think they've made some improvements down there, but they weren't prepared for sub-freezing temperatures at all. I mean, their pipes were exposed, their energy facilities, broke apart. I mean, they went into the Stone Age for several days because of this weather that we had just a couple of years ago down in Austin. I want to bring this up now. This is surface weather. These are what they call, these are models. Explain what we're looking at here, Doc.
Right. So this is a model that is run by the European Center for Weather Prediction. Oftentimes over the years, we found that the European model is the most accurate. And so I wanted your listeners and your viewers to see this because there's still some variability. It's 3 days away from the storm even getting close to Iowa, so things can change. What's happening in this prediction, you see lots of the little thin black lines across Iowa, which implies a really big change in pressure across the state. That is what creates wind. So models that look like this particular one would imply strong enough winds that we would likely have true blizzard conditions in Iowa.
Now here's another one. It's quite a bit different. Yeah.
Right. So this is from the model that we run in the United States, and it's valid at the exact same time, Thursday at noon. So you can see there's, far fewer lines crossing Iowa. So even though we would still have snow and we would have some wind, the conditions may not reach full blizzard conditions if a model like this one is correct. So again, three days in meteorology is like an eternity. 3 days ago, this particular model gave Pennsylvania 3 feet of snow from the storm. So that's why, at this point in time, you don't want to tell somebody an exact amount of snow or say for sure that there'd be blizzard conditions. The one constant we know without a doubt is it's going to be dangerously cold. There will be snow. There will be wind. And, if you're in the rural areas, I think we just saw the last 2 days, it didn't take much wind and snow to cause big problems on the roads. So problems are pretty much guaranteed in Iowa. It's just a question of, will this be something you tell your kids about someday?
Yeah, just a dusting of snow can be disastrous, both from a visibility standpoint and I don't know, the icing that they can do on the roadways. Okay, so there are our two models. Let me go back. This is the European model, and this is the United States one. I've got this in a loop. Let's take a look here and see how this thing kind of talk us through this, Doc.
Yeah, so here you see in the upper left is a huge high pressure that might set records for how intense the Arctic air is. But now we're getting out to Wednesday and Thursday, and you see the storm form. It swings down into Texas. It actually becomes most intense in this model when it's swinging up through Indiana, maybe far eastern Illinois, and up into Michigan. The newer model runs that are coming in today more directly hammer Chicago. And so the timing probably couldn't be worse. If the models today are exactly right, Chicago will have a major blizzard that would probably shut down O'Hare Airport from Thursday night through Friday, which will probably have this effect all across the country of messing up people's Christmas plans.
Yeah, and that goes to what I talk about. I got a lot of weather wonks, a lot of people that follow the weather. I mean, if you're in the news business or you have an eye towards the news, which so many people do, you're going to be interested in weather. But also, if you're a traveler for the holidays, as an example, a business traveler, an athlete, any number of things. I mean, you move from town to town, you go through these airports, and anybody that's been in the snarl in O'Hare, Captain John Cox is on my show all the time, and he likens it to a daisy chain. Works great as long as the daisy chain's all together, but you break one link and the whole chain throws apart. Now, here's something that just looking at this struck me again as I look at it. I'm going to play this once more, Doc. One thing, I've seen a lot of these, but I'm not used to seeing as this thing comes across here. I think those are isobars, those lines, how narrow they are, how compact. Look at this. What does that mean?
Well, so I mentioned, high pressure, we always associate with nice weather. You don't usually get precipitation with high pressure. The H symbol showing up there in Montana, that's actually the first thing that people started to notice. Meteorologists began noticing a week ago is the models were forecasting a high stronger than any we've ever seen in December. So if you're bringing down this enormous area of cold air with the high pressure, you're right, George. That means if you develop a low pressure storm, you're going to have this really impressive difference of pressure between the high and the low. So it's really like the high is the thing on steroids and is ridiculously strong. And that causes there to be so many isobars, which means a huge chunk of the country is going to have a lot of wind as the cold air is moving in, which will just make the cold air more dangerous and feel worse to everybody.
We'll go back to that very shortly, but the thing that I wanted to talk to you about is I never fear or haven't feared high pressure very much. Here in this part of the country, you always hear about low pressure and these storms, that are coming in the summertime in particular, and low pressure systems come in and they smack into the cold air or whatever, and you get all these tornadoes and derechos and all these type of things. As you mentioned, the high is going to be possibly historic. Well, does that mean there's a potential for an historic storm as a result, or just, record-breaking high pressure?
The storm, ironic, I don't think we'll have a record-breaking storm, but it could actually get close. And how strong the low-pressure storm gets is more related to that jet stream map that you showed and how sharp the bend is. So, I think the high formed by the jet stream poking up so close to the North Pole, and then it's pushing down so much cold air that actually is helping to create the bend in the jet stream. So they are related. And some of the worst scenario models that we see, the low is becoming almost as strong as we ever see when it gets into the Great Lakes. And the stronger the low gets, the worse the blizzard conditions would be in a place like Iowa. Also, the closer the center of the low is to Iowa, the worse our weather will be.
Well, yeah, again, I'm just a layman. I'm a knucklehead when it comes to this type of thing. But I always believe that you're not going to get very much snow when it's this cold. It seems like dry air, and you just don't get a lot of snow. Is that true here or not?
So the snow is the interesting issue. A lot will depend on how long it lasts. So that's why if that bend shifts a little bit further west, what we're going to find is that bend will actually eventually form into this big closed cyclonic circulation, even aloft, which would prolong the period of snow in Iowa. And that's going to be what determines how much we get. But yeah, I mentioned to somebody, this particular event is going to make us think about throwing out the window the saying it's too cold to snow. Some of the models are showing most of the snow falls on Thursday when it's going to be below 0 here in central Iowa. Like I said, we hate to give a snow amount as meteorologists this far ahead of time.
Yeah.
I can tell you pretty much all the models show that we'll have at least 4 inches in much of Iowa. And some parts of the state and some of the models show a lot more than 4 inches.
Jeez, and just 4 inches with the kind of wind that you're talking about, this light, powdery, dry, wind-blown snow could be catastrophic. Okay, let me bring this up on screen because this is also kind of dramatic. It's very colorful anyway, but talk about, these are the temperatures. This is really, this might be historic also.
Right. So this is the actual temperature, not what it feels like, but the actual temperature. And when I said this, the weather pattern this week in the US will have all the ingredients for a storm, and it's like the ingredients are on steroids. One of the ingredients you need for a storm is a contrast in temperature, which when you look at the color change here, it's in the 40s in much of Illinois. And by the time you get back to Iowa City, it's getting below 0. This is actually showing us the model prediction at noon on Thursday. So by noon, we usually picture we're getting warming up toward our high temperature. In this case, we're falling all morning, and it's already around 10 below 0 in Des Moines, according to this model.
Yeah. And that's going to be daytime, right?
That would be daytime, probably with snow, blowing snow, and wind chills that will feel much worse than that -10.
On Thursday.
On Thursday.
Wow. Okay. So let me bring this up. Now, we talked about Illinois, and it sounded like they were going to dodge a bullet, but I looked at this map. Got to remember, we're going to have these 30, 40 mile an hour winds possibly. That's wind chill, folks. They're going to be plenty cold, right, Doc?
Right. So this map is actually 6 hours later than the temperature map, because I just wanted people to see by supper time Thursday here in the I-35 corridor in Iowa, the wind chills would be colder than -40. The Weather Service issues wind chill warnings once it gets below -30. That's the most extreme statement that they can make. -40 is just very dangerous to be out in. So what this really means in Illinois, yes, there were places at lunchtime that were in the 40s. And by the time that they would maybe head home from work, it would feel like -20. So a drastic change in the places to our east.
And I think of Iowa, and I think of our brethren north of us up there, sistren. This is the proper term, but Minnesota, they're used to cold weather. But here's the national map, Doc, and this really is striking. You get down to these southern areas in particular, these folks are not used to this. They didn't move to these areas in particular to have this kind of winter. These are really dramatic temperatures.
Yeah, with everything so off the scales, you can spend hours talking about all the crazy stuff that's going to happen with the weather. I wanted George, you to show this map just so people could see this is the actual temperature and what the prediction is for Saturday morning when people wake up. Yeah. And it's basically freezing the whole way down to Brownsville at the south tip of Texas and into parts of Mexico, and it is freezing almost the whole way down into South Florida. And as you said, places like New Orleans are barely above 20. The South is also going to be really shocked by the cold, and they are going to be windy as well. I was seeing wind chills in the 20s, making it down to the Florida Keys in some of the models.
And I see some reporting that places like Las Vegas and even San Francisco, they're going to be record-breaking almost cold, right?
Well, a few days ago, that's what it looked like. There was a time where the models showed the cold air getting into them. But as you can see from this map, California and Las Vegas are in the yellow. So they luck out once again. The cold air pretty much goes along and east of the Rockies, which is what usually happens in the winter in our country. So they do dodge a bullet, but not so for the people at South Padre, in Florida.
God, and again, the wind is going to blow, folks. I mean, it's going to be so cold. My wife and I, we go around and around on this all the time. I'm kind of the old school person. I look at the thermometer and say, well, the temperature's that. And she says, yeah, but the wind chill's this. I said, well, that's the wind chill. Yeah, well, that's, that's if you're outside and you're human, it's going to be that cold. It's like we don't put enough, emphasis on wind chill, Doc.
Yeah, and I mentioned the weather service puts out their most extreme statement, a wind chill warning when it goes below -30. If you trust the models, it will go below -30 around lunchtime Thursday, and it may not get warmer than -30 until sometime Saturday. So, we're talking like potentially 48 hours here in Iowa where nobody should be outside unless they're, extremely well dressed.
My God. And of course, the snowbirds will tell you that's why they always go south, but they're not going to escape this either very much. Okay, let's go to our last slide here that kind of fits in with the theme of the show here as we approach the holidays. A white Christmas. And what do these colors show us how white a Christmas in certain areas, or what are they all about?
Right. So this is a model prediction for Christmas morning of the snow that will be on the ground. And so the different colors show how, different the amount of snow is. So when you start getting into the light blues, that's just an inch or two. So people in southern Arkansas, may have an inch or two. Get into Iowa, when you start getting into the pinks, you're talking 6 to 8 inches of snow on the ground. The dark red is at least a foot. When you start seeing those orange colors, there's over 2 feet of snow on the ground. And so, it's the timing is unfortunate on one hand for this event because it really may interfere with a lot of travel plans. But for people who do like to wake up to a white Christmas, having such extreme cold come into the country after you have a very big storm system means we may have a huge part of the country getting to experience a white Christmas altogether.
Travel issues, of course. And again, I always kind of just gravitate towards Arkansas. I'm looking down in that part of the world. That says they're going to have 2 or 3 inches of snow on the ground. But of course, with the wind, I don't know how much snow is going to be on the ground anywhere, but 2 or 3 inches down there, right?
Right. So yeah, you have to keep that in mind. This would be sort of the average snow cover. But as we know who live in Iowa, when you have a storm with wind, there will be areas where the snow will be pretty much blown away and other areas where it might be, 4 to 6 feet deep. So a big chunk of the east, because of the wind with this system, is going to have a lot of issues with drifting.
All right, before we lose you here today, I had a couple of questions regarding forecasting, snow, blizzards, that type of thing that I wanted to ask you. I remember in my days of reporting, the stations used to catch a lot of heat, a lot of flack from local businesses. They didn't like us reporting in dramatic terms about winter weather because it caused closings and maybe, it caused people just to stay away. It harmed business. Does that factor into weather forecasting at all in today's world? It seems like that has filtered into all parts of our life. I'm talking about, economics, the economy, business, that type of thing. The forecasters take that kind of stuff into account?
Definitely. We know that the further away you are from a storm, the more likely it is the models are going to be bouncing around and showing something different. So you tend to be cautious in what you say, which, so even now, I would say that the one thing that is a sure thing is it's going to be, very cold and dangerously low wind chills. And travel will not be good because no matter what, we should have enough snow that the wind will blow it around. You really have to wait another day or two before you might feel confident enough to say, okay, Iowa is going to have a true blizzard. And you're right. One of the reasons we don't want to mislead people and say with certainty way ahead of time that something's going to happen is, they may close down and then it might not happen. We also know on rare occasions in meteorology, our computer models really lock into something way ahead of time and they call it right. The most famous example was in 1993. It's believed that was the first time we ever saw this, where all of our models 5 days ahead of time predicted what became known as the storm of the century. And because of that, it was the first time that airlines, proactively started canceling flights and making sure their planes weren't anywhere on the East Coast, because every airport from Miami to Maine ended up getting shut down. And so, that was a scenario where you could accurately call it 5 days ahead. Sadly, nature doesn't give us a clue that, oh, this is going to be one of those times. But like I said, the models now are pretty much all very similar in what they're showing. And the bounces, the changes that are happening are not like going from New England to Iowa. It's more like, okay, will it be Indiana the most or Illinois? The changes are smaller. So we're starting to gain confidence. And I'm guessing if things don't change a lot within a day or two, you will probably hear a lot of plans being changed for Thursday and maybe even Friday.
Well, you got two ends of the spectrum. You got the weather wonks that I talked about, people like my wife and I that follow the weather very closely. I mean, we're dialed in when it comes to the weather. Then you've got other people that just believe the media and everything is fake, and they won't read a newspaper. They won't pay attention to the weather at all. They believe that it's all disinformation, and I think that's maybe playing more of a role than ever. But there's this crying wolf factor. And I talked at the top about this Hurricane Ian down in Florida, on the west coast of Florida, that you forecasted so early, and were spot on. I mean, maybe just a few miles off when it came to this thing. Well, I interviewed a city councilman at Fort Myers Beach down there, just got him on a landline basically and put him on the show, Dan Allers. And he talked about how there had been another hurricane forecast down there that was supposed to impact Fort Myers Beach, and it didn't amount to anything. So everybody just kind of blew it off, didn't pay attention. I'm like, my God, man. I mean, I live in the Midwest. We have tornado warnings all the time. I always pay attention to those, believe me. I mean, we're watching. Everybody just thought that it wasn't going to happen. And so he was on the second floor of a home of a friend, and water was coming onto the second floor. Fortunately, he, got out uninjured. But what about this crying wolf scenario where you don't want to predict the worst case scenario too often and be wrong, because as a forecaster, then people won't pay attention to you at all?
Yeah, that's very real. That's why if you're like today, 3 days away, you don't want to lock in and say there will be 8 inches of snow in Ames. You have to tone it down. And we weather people, or weather wonks, as you said, can get pretty excited when we see things that you rarely see occur. So it's kind of bad on social media. There are sites where people will instantly put the most extreme model solution, and that probably does more harm than good.
Alarmist, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay, a couple other quick hitters here before we lose you. The snowfall that's predicted could be large amounts in some areas. We're drought stricken, particularly where I'm at in this part of the country. I've always heard that it takes one heck of a lot of snow to give you any drought relief. Is there any potential for drought relief because of what's going to happen?
Yeah, I guess I would say every little bit helps. You alluded to this with the temperature near zero. The snow that would fall at the end of the week will be very fluffy. And so there really won't be a ton of moisture in it. Some of the model runs today that look the scariest for Iowa, there's still only about a ½ inch of water that they're expecting to fall. It's just that could fall as 8 or 10 inches of snow. But if you have a winter where you keep getting these small snows added on and then it all melts in the spring, that can be more help, especially if the ground gets a chance to thaw so that the melting snow can sink down into it.
Okay, put you on the spot here one last time. I mentioned that you're always watching the connection between weather and climate. What you're seeing right now, this system that's coming through, it's historic in some respects. It's unusual at the very least. Do you see any connection with the climate with that?
That would be hard to say. I've seen several people pointed out if this comes to pass, this would be the first time in the 21st century where we see, this kind of cold over such a big area near Christmas. It might rival, I think, in 89 and 83 were the last times where we had something like a huge Arctic outbreak at Christmas time. So I mean, I guess I just would say, yes, things like this should still happen as the planet is warming. It's just that they become, fewer and far between.
All right, Doc, you're great to come on the show and give us the insight here. Hopefully this doesn't, I mean, do you see any potential for this to even get worse? I mean, could this get weirder as we get closer? Not very much at this point.
Well, I mean, for where you are specifically, like I would say for those of us in Iowa, it could get weirder. The Chicago National Weather Service office, in their discussion this afternoon, they made mention of the fact that they didn't want people to panic too much yet, even though Chicago looks like it could get a foot or two of snow, because they said lots of times as these storms approach the US, they end up bending more and more to the left. Well, in the case of Chicago, if the track bends more and more to the left, Chicago might even have rain for a big part of the storm and not have as much snow. But of course, what is off to the left if you're coming up from the south? What is left of Chicago? Well, Iowa. So they were hinting there's been a tendency sometimes in the past that these storms, as they get even more intense, will swing the worst conditions further west, which would not be good for us in Iowa if that happens. So, yeah, things could get weirder here in Iowa.
We'll keep an eye on it. I hope I don't have to bring you back, but I'm going to put out a chit there. If it gets really weird, I'm going to get you back on the show here. We'll talk about it some more. Well, we got to run. We're going to close up shop for today. I'll let you wrap it up. I'll let you put a bow on it here, Doc. Anything in summary that you want to say about this system, about weather in general, about climate, anything here as we close?
I think the one thing I'm trying to make sure everybody is aware of, this system is going to be very different than other snow events or even most other blizzards we remember because of the cold. People are used to sliding off the road or getting stuck. Well, you do not. I mean, if you're stuck outside and you're not prepared for it, in minus 40 wind chill, very bad things happen very quickly. So I think that's why this could be a much more dangerous snowstorm. Even if it's not a blizzard, conditions will be bad enough. I think everybody needs to realize this is not your normal winter event with such extreme cold coming in.
Okay, let's hit this real quick before we end. This is from Mary Knox. Now, she's the admin of an Iowa News website here on Facebook, so I want to get this in. And you talked about this briefly, but she says, what I see more with climate is the very strong winds. They just did not seem to have such huge pressure gradients in the past. Am I right? You have seen this type of thing before, right or not?
It's interesting because in general, if you average the winds day by day, they tend to be weakening due to global warming. But, you think back to the event last December here in Iowa, which became first ever December derecho in the country. I think we haven't had enough events to really study to know if climate change is going to really change this. But yeah, it's starting to seem like we're getting, several of these events where either the low is so strong or the high is so strong that it leads to what seems like a stronger wind event over maybe a bigger area than we had seen in the past.
Okay, Doc, I'll say the same thing to you that I say to everybody when it comes to weather. Stay safe, stay well, stay home. That'd be the best solution. Don't travel on Thursday. This does not look good, folks. Dr. Gallus, thanks again for coming on this podcast by George.
Thanks, George, for having me.
And folks, if you like seeing Dr. William A. Gallus Jr. on Podcast by George, if you like getting his expert analysis and opinion and really the facts, watch us on Facebook or on YouTube, where you can see these videos and these maps and charts and that type of thing. Pictures worth 1,000 words, as they say. For me, I got to look at this thing. And so I think that's really great. That's where the video part of these live streams lives on. And then, of course, if you just get the audio, and there's value in that as well, you can get that on iTunes, the iHeartRadio app, Deezer, Spotify, Stitcher, places like that. But we're going to wrap it up today, folks. That's going to do it. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.